Welcome, everyone, to the Dynasty Fantasy Football Podcast presented by the 33rd Team. I am your host, as always, Josh Larkey, and I'm joined, as always, by our lead Dynasty analyst, Ian Miller. Today, we're going to talk about all the big Dynasty risers and fallers after 2 weeks of NFL action. Let's get right down to it. We'll start at the quarterback position, hit running backs, hit receivers, hit tight ends, and then we'll get you out of here with a spicy take from Ian. With quarterback, let's talk about Jordan Love. I think all things considered, he's played pretty well. He's pacing, though, for 442 pass attempts. That's just 26 per game. League average is about 33, 34 most years. So he's well below that. But again, he's also pacing for 51 passing touchdowns and 0 interceptions. Christian Watson probably returns this week for week 3. But I think the pass touchdown regression is going to hit Jordan Love like a freight train. Given the mixed signals we're getting right now, are you a Dynasty buyer or seller of Love after these first 2 weeks?
I'm a Dynasty seller of Love. I will admit that when you look at some of the peripherals that he's put up, they do look pretty good. In fact, when we look at passing touchdown percentage, he's leading the league at 11.5%. Adjusted yards per attempt, he's also leading the league at 9.9. But when you get into the thick of it, there's a few things that stand out. First, the Packers have been one of the lowest passing volume offenses that we've seen in the first 2 weeks, averaging just 26 pass attempts per game. That's nothing. So something where you only throw 26 pass attempts per game, it can really elevate your passing touchdown percentage, your per attempt numbers when we're looking at it. So when we're looking at some notable like film grinders, they are not actually impressed with Love these games. In fact, they have him closer to, say, a Joshua Dobbs than they would top of the league. So when it comes to Jordan Love and his increasing dynasty value because of these strong 2 weeks, I would use these 2 weeks to say, hey, a guy that hasn't started for 4 years, wasn't a very good prospect, even now isn't someone who rushes the football, just 1.8 rushing points per game on less than 10% carry percentage. I'm going to use these 2 weeks and see if I can sell for pretty marginal profit.
I like that. Now, I'm going to let you take an early Justin Fields victory lap. You had him Dynasty quarterback 11 before the season began because your concerns were essentially, this does not look like the long-term starter in Chicago given his passing struggles. Those, if anything, have just been amplified through 2 weeks where they gave him DJ Moore. Darnell Mooney is now healthy, and all he does is stand back there and throw inaccurate passes and take sacks. Do you have anything else to add here, or you just want to tip your cap, take the victory lap, and we can move on to some running backs?
Yeah, we could do that. Although one thing I want to say is from a game theory perspective, one thing that I actually caught a lot of heat on this offseason was saying that I would much rather have Anthony Richardson than Justin Fields. And why? Well, they could both be terrible passers. The thing is, Justin Fields has shown us for 2 years that he's a terrible passer, but he's going to have strong rushing production. But that's the same case with Anthony Richardson. The difference is, like Justin Fields, they let him be terrible as a rookie. They let him be terrible in his second year. But those rushing points per game allowed fantasy success, fantasy value gains. When it comes to Anthony Richardson, he could very well be terrible, but they will continue to let him do it. In a third year for Justin Fields, we're now looking at something where the NFL could step in and say, or the Bears, for example, could step in and say, all right, these fantasy points are going to be 0 because we want someone who is a capable passer.
Let's turn out to the running back position. Thoughts, prayers, good vibes, whatever you want to do, send them out to Nick Chubb. He's out for the season. I've seen the Twitter doctors essentially suggesting that the return might be as much as 15 months given the damage to his knee, and that would actually put him at risk of missing the 2024 season as well. So I wouldn't even say like he's guaranteed to play for all of next year. I know you've dropped him precipitously in your running back rankings. Your dynasty rankings are free on the33rdteam.com for quarterback, running back, receiver, tight end. Each week you write up the risers and fallers. This is a must-read article if you play Dynasty. He's your Dynasty RB 44. Let's say that I have Nick Chubb. I'm depressed. Makes sense. I'm trying to offload him. What should I even be expecting at this point? Obviously, we're not getting any kind of first-round picks anymore. I think he's 28 now?
He's about to be 28.
Might not play and then what is he? He might not play till he's 29 and a half if he doesn't play till 2025. What would you get back and be like, you know what, I'm just going to take this deal and move on from Nick Chubb at this point?
Yeah, I think that's the hardest thing to do for some fantasy gamers is you had Nick Chubb. He was worth You have this injury that essentially derails all of that. The thing that gets in Dynasty gamers' heads is that they go, okay, but I had this asset and he was worth so much. Why would I sell him for so little now? Well, the thing is, now that's over. That is behind us. It is all about moving forward. And if you could sell Nick Chubb for say late second, or add something to Nick Chubb that makes him worth a contender second or someone second, or they're just hoping that he'll eventually come back, then you rid yourself of the risk that when he comes back, say he's 29 years old, off a major injury at the running back position, he might not even be worth what you're paying for now, and there's a high likelihood of it. So I would say during the fallout, while things are still being worked around, Twitter doctors don't 100% know what's going on. Now's a great time to see if you can add a little bit and get that late second.
Yeah, I think there's a real chance he just never plays football again. As sad as it is to say, he's been one of my favorite, I'm sure one of your favorite running backs throughout the past half decade plus. Maybe the best pure runner of the past few decades. Probably him or Adrian Peterson. Let's move on, though, to the new Cleveland running back in town that's going to be the starter, Jerome Ford. See, everyone out there, you might have thought I was leaning towards Kareem Hunt. No, I'm hinting that Ford is the starter because the Browns chose him over Kareem Hunt already once 2 months ago. I think they're going to choose Ford over Hunt again. To recap, Ford carried 16 times for 106 yards on Monday night. He caught 3 of 4 targets for 23 yards and a touchdown. Are you a Ford buyer or seller right now? He's running behind a premium offensive line. There's no Nick Chubb rest of season. I think Kareem Hunt was like the best possible free agent addition, given that they already showed they preferred Ford once. But I think a lot of people are thinking along my same train of thought. So based on what you've started to see in the markets, are you going to be buying or selling Ford?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now, since his value shot up, he's probably about fairly priced. I see him in terms of running backs, about running back between 20 and 25. Anywhere a little bit later, I'm definitely buying. And I think one reason that may sound funny is if you look at week 1, when they had a healthy Nick Chubb, one of the best running backs in the NFL, he had a near 40% carry percentage, and that was with a healthy Nick Chubb. And when Nick Chubb went down, they just continued to ride Jerome Ford. In those, once Nick Chubb went out, he was over a 60% carry percentage and had over 3.03 yards per team rush attempt, which is really good, especially when you consider there's not many running backs in the NFL. There's actually only 3 that have played in the first 2 weeks and have a yards per team rush attempt above 3. So it was efficient with a strong workload and even got a 10% target share once Nick Chubb went out, which is very adequate. And the other thing you said is they already chose him over Kareem Hunt. If Kareem Hunt is the reason you can get him a little cheaper than you could yesterday, then I'm all for that because they've already shown that they want to use this guy. And the fact that we have had a glimpse of him being, well, efficient with a strong workload shows that there's some pretty high-end rest of season projections you can make, especially on a team that under Stefanski has never been a high-volume passing team and, in fact, runs the ball. And we saw that even when Nick Chubb went out. So I think all that put together makes Jerome Ford much closer to a buy than he is a sell.
Yeah, you'd be hard-pressed to find a running back like Jerome Ford where he's 220 pounds, and he can break off a 69, pretty nice, yard run on prime time. Not many running backs with that size, big play combo. Let's turn to James Cook. James Cook had 17 carries, 4 catches, 159 total yards in week 2. However, Damian Harris and Latavius Murray combined for 5 goal line carries in that game. James Cook got the big fat 0. Cook had 20 fantasy points. But again, if you need 159 total yards and 4 catches to get 20 fantasy points in PPR formats, I find it hard to believe you're going to be a consistent top 15 fantasy option when you need such outrageous, not just usage, but efficiency as well to get there. You've moved him up your rankings after these 2 weeks, as I think everyone should, given that he looks like a workhorse outside of the goal line work. But what is the dynasty ceiling for someone like James Cook if he's never going to score more than a few touchdowns per season?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the thing with James Cook is, yes, obviously you should be moving James Cook up because I don't think too many people expected this level of workload. And if you did, it was, well, a very good projection because we're talking about someone that never even had a 25% carry percentage his all 4 years in Georgia. His first year in the NFL is 20%, and his career high target share from college to the NFL was just 7.8%. So when we talk about projecting forward, the biggest predictor of a high workload is a previous high workload, which is something James Cook didn't get. So now we have someone in the first 2 weeks that's handling 50% of the carries, has over a 12% target share, and isn't inefficient with it at all. He's about league average in terms of efficiency, maybe a little above league average. So there's definitely some positives that were hard to project to start the season. But like you said, the ceiling's always going to be limited because we see them using guys like Latavius Murray, Damian Harris, and they still have Josh Allen at the goal line. That, yes, for running backs, touchdown percentage is a little stickier than it is for wide receivers and tight ends who are catching the ball. The guys who are running it in seems to be a bit stickier, and they have shown that they do not want to use James Cook for that. So yes, the workload has improved. I think he's a much better dynasty asset than I thought coming into the season, but you're still looking at someone who you're hoping is a back-end RB1 with the type of role that he currently has with the Bills.
Guys, that is Ian Miller at Dynasty_IM on Twitter. He is my favorite Dynasty analyst. He's probably yours as well. If you're listening, make sure to give him a follow if you're not doing so already. Let's turn to DeAndre Swift. God, I love DeAndre Swift. It feels like I can never quite get him right. I'm always like, oh, like this is the week, and then it's not the week. But I will let everyone know I victory lapped it on Twitter, as I should. I predicted before week 2 that DeAndre Swift would go nuclear and be the top waiver pickup if anyone dropped him. Sure enough, in Gainwell's absence, he goes nuts. After 1 carry and 2 targets in week 1, where Gainwell has his 18 touches, Swift in week 2 carries 28 times for 175 yards and a touchdown and catches all 3 of his targets, and he scores 27 PPR fantasy points. The upside for Swift is massive, but I think the role is going to let us down on occasion, often, somewhere in there. We've at this point seen the week 1 terrifying floor, the week 2 week winning ceiling. Keep trade cut has DeAndre Swift RB15 in Dynasty. That feels a little aggressive. You have him at RB22. That feels a little low. Are we going to meet in the middle? How do you see DeAndre Swift potentially fluctuating in your rankings? Are you just kind of assuming that if Gainwell returns, the bell cow role is gone? Talk me through like where Swift can go up and down at this point.
Yeah, so I think one of the funny things with DeAndre Swift last week is we know that he, on a weekly basis, has high-end upside. The thing that we probably couldn't project with that was he scored almost all of his points through the rushing game, 23.5 rushing points per game, compared to just 3.6 receiving points per game. This is someone who wasn't a high workload guy as a rusher and was someone who was a good, viable receiving threat out of the backfield. But DeAndre Swift, when he went nuclear, basically did the exact opposite of that. So with DeAndre Swift, yes, I don't think we're going to get anything close to what we did last week on a continued basis. And there's going to be some floor weeks with how the Phillies is likely to use their running backs by committee still. I don't think he's some high-end rushing workload after 1 week. But the thing is, I think Swift is a fine hold at RB15, even though I have him at 22. He's someone that we actually didn't have a very high target share in week 2. And this is someone whose bread and butter is a high target share, getting receptions out of the backfield. So even if he's not getting the rushing workload he is, we could still have a decent fantasy floor as long as he's used in the receiving game like we can project him to be. So I think Swift is someone who's a fine hold, but when we talk about a week winning ceiling, that was pretty crazy to see that he did it through a rushing workload that we've basically never seen Swift take on, which is kind of the downside, why I'm maybe a little lower on consensus, is that yes, when he gets a high-end carry percentage, it comes from a team that runs the ball a lot. When he gets a high target share, it comes from the team that doesn't pass the ball a lot. So I think when you go to Swift's strengths, it's not the most ideal in an offense in terms of volume like this, but I think he's a fine hold at RB15.
Let's talk about another running back, Kyren Williams. Cam Akers was put out of a job last week. We had breaking news about 5 minutes ago. Cam Akers is now on the Vikings. So Alexander and Madison, Cam Akers, they can fight over who's going to average 3 yards per carry and fumble the ball each week. Good for the two of them. Now, turning back to Kyren Williams of the Rams, he had all 14 running back carries and 10 of the 11 running back targets last week. That sounds like a bell cow to me. Again, 10 targets, 14 carries. He finished RB1 overall on the week with 28 PPR fantasy points. The competition for touches at this point is Ronnie Rivers, which feels like a creative player, and Zach Evans. And Zach Evans was just never all that good in college outside of a couple big games. Mostly just a between the 20s grinder type. How much higher can Kyren Williams' dynasty value get rest of season, where It looks like he's very insulated with his job after kicking out the incumbent and having nobody behind him. But it's a bad Rams offensive line. But also, this Rams team has been scoring a lot more points than I think any of us expected so far through 2 weeks. Talk through the range of outcomes with Williams here.
I think it's actually kind of a scary range of outcomes in that we're kind of seeing a ceiling usage out of Kyren Williams. And we've seen Sean McVay take guys who aren't all that efficient of rushers or all that good of running backs from our projections and turn them into bell cows over a period of time. I mean, we're not too far removed from last year where Cam Akers was not getting the workload. In fact, he wasn't even with the team, and they have other players taking bell cow usage. Now, when we look at Kyren Williams, who's absolutely got that, he's someone who's not been very efficient. His 46.8% carry percentage is very high. He is being used a lot. But 1.68 yards per team rush attempt is not adequate to the level that you'd expect a high-end workload like that. And the other thing is when we talk about the receiving game, he's one of just 3 players with at least a 75% route participation. So someone that is being used a lot in the receiving game. The other 2 are Christian McCaffrey and Bijan Robinson. That's simply that's not who Kyren Williams is. And when we look at the peripherals that they are putting up in those, he clearly, for having this same level of route participation, has the lowest target share, the lowest efficiency with his target share. And in terms of carries amongst that same group, he is dead last by a lot in terms of rushing efficiency. So yes, you are getting a guy that's going to get the workload. But that's kind of just Sean McVay's thing, because there's risk that there's just someone simply that's good that comes into the building, or that they find someone else who's in a similar Kyren Williams situation and elevate him and give him a role. So I think the range of outcomes is actually quite scary, and someone where if you're getting solid value right now, it's someone where I would probably be pretty comfortable selling.
Let's turn to, I think, a must-discuss player after week 2, which is crazy to talk about when it involves Zack Moss. No other Indianapolis Colts running back took a snap in week 2. It was just Moss. He carried 18 times. He had 88 rushing yards and a touchdown. 4 catches, 19 yards. With those 88 rushing yards, the 4 catches, 19 receiving yards, and the touchdown, that's almost 21 fantasy points. Here's part 1 of this question. Ian, let's say that I'm desperate. I need a 2-week rental at running back in Dynasty until Jonathan Taylor returns from the PUP list. What would you trade to get Zack Moss for 2 weeks, where you're basically getting a bell cow in an offense that's been, I think, quite a bit better than advertised?
Yeah, in situations like this, I basically want to pay a player asset versus a draft pick asset, especially because if he's a plug and play for you instantly, like an RB starter, then there's a good chance that there's probably some teams in your league with a higher projection than you have. And that sets your pickup to be a little bit earlier than you are expecting when you buy it. So that's why I like buying player assets. But in terms of buying with a player asset, probably someone that's equivalent to a third, although paying for a 2-week rental, especially when that 2-week rental is Zack Moss, probably isn't the most beneficial thing you can do for your fantasy team.
All right, part 2. This is the more exciting speculative version. Let's say Jonathan Taylor doesn't play for the Colts the rest of the season. Either he literally doesn't play for anyone or he gets traded. I don't think that's actually the most shocking thing that could happen. I think there's a real possibility. So let's say that Jonathan Taylor never plays another snap for the Colts. If we had the foresight to know this was going to happen, just so we can build a range of outcomes for Zack Moss, if we knew this was going to happen and there's no more Jonathan Taylor, then what would you trade if you're getting rest of the season from bell cow Zack Moss?
Essentially, I would be paying a player equivalent of a second if I knew that Jonathan Taylor was going to be out the rest of the season. But then again, this is another thing like where he talked about with Kyren Williams, where he's being forced into not just bell cow usage, bell cow plus usage. When we look at week 2, he had a route participation of 91.4%. That's simply just insane, and it will not hold up over the course of the season. And what he did with that was turn it into a modest 12.1% target share. That's just okay. And then when we look at his carry percentage, near 80% of the carries. And actually, I would like to say that it probably has more to do with Deion Jackson than Zack Moss. We've seen who Zack Moss is. The Indianapolis Colts basically gave Deion Jackson a near bell cow level usage last week, and it was disgusting. And they said, we probably never want to see this again. And they turned it all into Zack Moss. So it's one of those things where he's never really been a super efficient rusher on high volume. And now that he's getting high volume, the fantasy points will come. But someone that I'm probably not too interested in buying here.
Let's now turn to the receiver position. This is the most anticipated player of the show. Everyone listening wants to hear about Puka Nacua. Before we discuss his stats, I read an anecdote that I think is hilarious, endearing, makes me just want to buy a Puka Nacua jersey. Apparently, Puka is a nickname, and in Samoan it means fat. And I guess he was a chubby kid, and people just called him like essentially like Fat Nacua growing up, and the nickname stuck, and now he owns it. And he's been the best fantasy receiver through 2 weeks, not named Tyreek Hill. So I think if that's a story that doesn't get you pumped, then I don't know what will. 5th round pick Puka Nacua has at least 15 targets, 10 catches, and 119 yards in each of the games this year. The problem though is like Cooper Kupp's probably coming back in a couple weeks. However, like I don't think there's any way that you can see what Puka does after 2 weeks and then be around. Like Sean McVay's smart. He's not going to see that and go, you know what? Let's just never let Puka Nacua play again. I think he's a clear starting receiver. He's going to have work the rest of the season. I don't think in any way we have a Travis Fulgham Eagles situation that I think a lot of us are scarred by from a few years ago. Are you going to buy into this Puka Nacua hype, or are you trying to sell? And I think for everyone out there that's like, what do you mean sell? We're not saying that we think he's completely fake. When I frame it as a sell, it's more if the market takes it to a place we're not comfortable with, then we'll sell. I think we're both in agreement that Puka Nacua at least will have some kind of real legitimate role rest of season. That being said, do you feel like you're on the buy team or on the sell team with Mr. Nacua?
So the thing with Puka is you make a good point, because I've seen a lot of Travis Fulgham things thrown out. Oh, it's such a small sample. We've seen this before. Well, the thing with Travis Fulgham is he was years into his career. It was the middle of the season. We're talking about Puka, who was a rookie and doing this in his first 2 games. It's a much different situation, and I honestly don't think it's too comparable at all. That being said, it's also an unprecedented situation. He's breaking records, and it's not even as if this is a Jamar Chase coming out or some high-end prospect where we're like, oh, wow, this is it right here. When we're talking about Puka, this is someone who was a 5th-round prospect, obviously a pretty bad hit rate, and is starting his career off with a 37.6% target share. Now, a few things regarding his points per game. When we look at his points per game, yes, he has the target share, and he's in a lot. He has a very high route participation on a team that's throwing the ball near 50 times per game in their first 2 weeks, 46.5 to be precise. That is definitely not going to hold, especially what we've seen from Sean McVay's history. They have never really been a very high volume passing offense, aside from one time during Sean McVay's run. And as much as maybe they are this year, they're not going to be a team that's at 46.5. The other thing is when we talk about Cooper Kupp, another hyper-targeted guy, this obviously takes a little dent out of Puka Nacua, and then we kind of start to see, okay, who is this guy looking at film grades? Who is this guy when we get to see him with a Cooper Kupp in terms of target earning ability? So yes, it's definitely not a Travis Fulgham. When we talk about buying and selling, I have him at wide receiver 29, and I think that's a very fine place for, honestly, there's still a lot of high upside while there's still some downside risk, but Keep Trade Cut has this guy near like Jackson Smith and Jigba and your top 15 dynasty wide receivers, to where I would say, you're probably not going to get another chance to sell an asset like this. Even if he does blow up, how much further up can he continue to go when you could cash out for a much more known high-end upside asset? So he's someone who's probably, in terms of current market value, a sell to me.
Let's talk about Nico Collins. Shout out CJ Stroud, looking like he's going to be the garbage time hero that we want and need all season for Nico Collins. Collins led the team with 11 targets in week 1. He caught 6 of them for 80 yards. And then again in week 2, he doubles down with 9 targets and he catches 7 for 146 yards and a touchdown. This week, you wrote him up as one of your biggest risers. He went from Dynasty wide receiver 52 to wide receiver 36 overnight. Rightfully so. Let's say that he has another great performance in week 3 against Jacksonville. How much higher can you see Nico Collins going? Like, the first name that came to mind is you have Amari Cooper, wide receiver 32. I think if he has another good week, he probably passes Cooper. Is that kind of where you're at? Can he go even higher than that? Because I think CJ Stroud, we weren't in love with him as a prospect, but I think we both agree he looked like an early round 1 quarterback prospect. So far, he's living up to the hype despite a patchwork Texans offensive line. At this point, I'm pretty certain Collins and Stroud are the real deal with their connection.
Yeah, the thing with Nico Collins is that it's not something where this is totally a surprise, if we're being honest. When we look at his first 2 years, his peripherals were actually pretty solid, and something that led him to have a root or range of outcomes that has Calvin Ridley at the top. So it's not as if that this guy coming into year 3 didn't have a shown high upside. And when we look at his peripherals, you mentioned that they're throwing the ball a lot in garbage time, which is giving them above 40 pass attempts per game. But that's something that we could see holding because the Texans aren't a very good team. And as CJ Stroud betters, we have peripherals that shows that Nico Collins is good, actually. In this 2-game sample, we have a 25.3% target rate and 2.86 yards per out run. That is really good from a wide receiver. And it's believable because it's not just like this is out of nowhere. The first 2 years led up to a possible year 3 breakout where it's not totally out of the question. So I think as this sample size grows and his peripherals continue to be what they are, we have someone who could absolutely rise into, honestly, a top 20 dynasty wide receiver in an improved CJ Stroud offense, especially when you're projecting a year ahead, with CJ Stroud improvement and offensive improvement.
Let's talk about Treylon Burks. This man has 7 targets through 2 weeks. The target share is at 12%. Ryan Tannehill's looked shaky. The offensive line's as bad as expected. DeAndre Hopkins is there this year and next year. You've already dropped Burks considerably in your rankings. Do you think he continues to fall, or do you see him kind of stabilizing as a low-end dynasty wide receiver 3 type?
Yeah, I mean, he likely stabilizes there, especially because I don't think a guy who people really liked going into year 2 is going to fall off the face of the earth. Now, the thing is, he has 2 things working against him. First of all, he himself has not been very good. Last year, part of the reason we liked him was he was a good prospect. He was a first-round prospect coming in with good background in college in terms of targeting and earning ability. Last year, while he didn't have a high snap percentage, at least compared to his other rookies, he still had a 21.3% target rate, which is very solid for a rookie wide receiver, especially one that's a good prospect. Now, in 2 games, we have a 12.7% target rate, a considerable drop from what we saw last year, and he is getting the snaps, and yet he is earning less targets than he did all of his rookie season. So yes, that likely improves unless it's just some dramatic year 2 fall off. But even with improvement, we need very, very, very strong peripherals for an offense that is low passing volume and a struggling Ryan Tannehill in terms of efficiency. So he has quite an uphill battle. While I still think he stabilizes around wide receiver 3 prices and about where I have him ranked, he's someone that's going to have a hard time gaining value at this point if they don't improve mightily.
We're going to end on a fun note, everyone. I know it's depressing. We have to talk about Treylon Burks, but let's talk about some fun round 1 rookie wide receivers from this year. You just moved Jordan Addison ahead of Jackson Smith-Njigba, but you still have Smith-Njigba right ahead of Zay Flowers in Dynasty. Give us a little context behind having Jordan Addison, JSN, then Zay Flowers, all within a couple picks of each other, or all within like a couple ranks of each other, essentially, at the receiver position.
Yeah, so in terms of my process, when we look at Jordan Addison, Jackson Smith-Njigba, we're talking about 2 elite prospects, which means that the hit rate was very good. So we could go in and expect them to be quite good. Zay Flowers wasn't an elite prospect, but he has shown things in the first 2 weeks that gives us hope. Now, why would I put Jordan Addison ahead of Jackson Smith-Njigba, but not Zay Flowers? Well, like I said, he had the elite prospect background. We had a feeling he would be good. And then we look at Jordan Addison in these first couple weeks. He has a 16.4% target rate on an average depth of target of 16.5, meaning he's earning in the first 2 games for a rookie a pretty solid share when he's on the field, and he's doing it deeper downfield, which is more susceptible to fantasy points. With Jackson Smith-Njigba, yes, he is earning targets when he is on the field. That's why he has a 23.4% target rate, but he's doing it at just 1.7 average depth of target, which is very puzzling for a wide receiver, even if he had a low ADOT in college, not to that level. That's running back-esque.
It's like Rondale Moore.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And with Jackson Smith-Njigba, we have a history of him being, or a history in college that leads us to believe that these first 2 weeks he will likely improve upon. Now, with Zay Flowers, it's a similar deal. Yes, he has a very similar target rate when he's on the field, 24.2%. But his average depth of target is below 6. So someone where we're talking about also manufactured targets, but he doesn't have the college pedigree, I would say, to say, okay, I feel comfortable putting him ahead of the wide receiver 1 in this class just 2 weeks in. Whereas Jordan Addison was close enough as a prospect where you take these 2 weeks and you go, okay, there's actually something that's very promising here and likely makes me feel better than a Jackson Smith and Jigba.
Very well said. Guys, make sure you follow Ian Miller at Dynasty_IM on Twitter. And you can toss me a charity follow if you want as well at JLarky Tweets. Let's talk tight end. Luke Musgrave has not hit a 15% target share yet in either game, but he led the team in routes run in both weeks. That's very promising for a rookie tight end. He's pacing for over 600 receiving yards. That looks like a strong rookie season. But Christian Watson's going to return this week. Rookie Jaden Reed's emerged as a top target earner while Watson's been out. We already talked at the start of the show about how Jordan Love's in for some regression. Why are you still optimistic about Luke Musgrave when, at least for this year, he's probably behind Christian Watson, Jaden Reed, maybe even Aaron Jones for targets in the pass game? So what promising signs are there right now for the second round rookie tight end?
So first, I think he was an okay prospect. I had him as an upside prospect, and he has solid athleticism. Now, the thing about why you want to buy into guys like this, especially early, is that we don't need very, very strong production, especially from a rookie tight end, for them to be very, very high in value. I mean, even guys like, we'll get to a few rookies, are top 6, top 8 clear dynasty tight ends, and it's not as if they have completely shattered the world or they're even top 8 in production, because they don't need to be. What you need to be in terms of, well, being a good dynasty tight end and gaining value as a rookie is show that you have an ability to earn targets right away. And in his first 2 weeks, he does have a 13.5% target share, and the Green Bay Packers want to use him over an 80% route participation. That is strong. And the other thing is, unlike some other rookie tight ends that we'll get to, he's doing it at an average depth of target of 12.9. When we look at 2022, there are only 3 tight ends that had at least a 13% target share on an average depth of target deeper than 12. Mark Andrews, Kyle Pitts, and Greg Dulcich. At one point, all 3 were top 12 dynasty tight ends. And right now, Kyle Pitts and Mark Andrews are top 3 dynasty tight ends. So when we look at Luke Musgrave and his role and where he's earning his targets, especially in the first 2 weeks, there is a ton of upside there, and it's a very tantalizing dynasty buy.
Wow. Sorry, everyone. I am apparently having some Wi-Fi difficulties. We threw on the hotspot. Before we get you out of here with a spicy take, a reminder that Ian's Dynasty rankings are free on the 33rd Team site. Make sure you check him out. He's updating them every single week with the biggest risers and fallers, writing up those players to help you better navigate through his rankings. And if you play Fantasy Football Redraft Edition, which I think pretty much anyone listening is going to be doing, both Dynasty and Redraft, my fantasy rankings are always free on the 33rd Team for the rest of the 2023 season. If you have questions, Dynasty, trade questions, start sit questions for redraft trade questions, whatever it might be, make sure that you hop into the free Discord. And I don't think there's a better place to get your questions answered. I'm in there always working my tail off to make sure that I answer every single question. Smart, dumb, thought-provoking, doesn't matter. I will work to answer all of them. So make sure you hop into our Discord. That is going to be linked in pretty much every single one of our articles that are free to read on the 33rdteam.com. Now, Ian, get us out of here with a spicy dynasty ranking at the tight end position that you are willing to stand behind.
Now, everyone knows that Dalton Kincaid has been a high-end value or a high-end dynasty tight end since the second he got drafted. People saw Dalton Kincaid, a round 1 tight end, that went to the Buffalo Bills and clearly made him the rookie tight end 1. And this far into the season, he has a 12.8% target share, and he has an average depth of target below 5. But what if I told you that there was a rookie tight end that I actually like a little more than Dalton Kincaid right now? Yes, we talk about how Kincaid was a first-round prospect, but this guy only went 9 picks after Dalton Kincaid, had a better analytical college profile than Dalton Kincaid, has a current in his first 2 weeks, a better target share, a deeper average depth of target, and a much better target rate than Dalton Kincaid does. And the one thing that you may be saying is, well, he's not on the Bills offense, except this offense is also a high volume passing offense. And the guy that I'm talking about where I would be ranking him above Dalton Kincaid is rookie Sam Laporta.